with useful guides and resources. Please click on the Festival Partners tab to chat with the relevant partner representatives. To continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates in this session, please make full use of the messaging function or the event feed in the platform. Finally, please note that this session will be recorded and you will be able to access the recordings after the festival. The development challenges posed by the 21st century can no longer be tackled by any one entity by itself. Over the years, we have seen how interconnected and intersectional problem solving has evolved, and it is important that the designs of the impact ecosystem reflect the realities of developmental challenges. In South Asia and globally, collaborative work between the public and private sector has greatly eased problem solving to a large extent. However, programs aimed at development and growth acceleration, especially those that leverage private sector investment, continue to be implemented in silos, with little cross-fertilization of learnings or capability to collaborate for greater impact. In this session, our panelists will discuss the impact of driving systems change through collaboratives. To begin the session, I would like to call upon your moderator, Ratish Balakrishnan, co-founder and managing partner at Sattva. Ratish, over to you, please.
Thank you, Rasika. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be part of this panel discussion. And I hope we are making this a very engaging 1 hour for all of you. I think one of the big learnings for us last year has really been the fact that to solve the problems that we are facing in the social sector today is not something that is something that a single stakeholder, organization, or individual can do. And it really needs collaborative action to come together. So one of the questions that we are going to not talk about in this panel discussion is why should we collaborate? Or why do we need collaborators? I really want to stay away as much as possible in today's panel discussions from truisms. What I'd love to talk about today with the panelists that I have, and it's an esteemed panel, is really how do we make collaboratives successful? How do we make collaboratives agile? How do we make them efficient? How do we make sure that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts when diverse stakeholders come together? And a success of a true collaborative is really in the diversity of the stakeholders that you bring in. And going by that metric, the success of today's panel is already settled because I have a very diverse set of panelists who have joined me today for the panel discussion. We have 4, esteemed panelists who have joined us. We have Mohit Bhatnagar, who is the managing director of Sequoia. We have Geeta Goyal, who is the country director of Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, India. We have Ashutosh Chadda, who is the VP and head of public policy and government affairs, South Asia at MasterCard. And we have Ved Arya, who is the founder and former CEO of Srijan and is a core member of Pradhan. So from venture capital to foundations to nonprofits to industry, we have 1 representative, which hopefully gives us a view of collaborators from 4 diverse points of view. Just to set the context and how we'll run this panel today, in about 45 seconds from now, I will stop talking and I'll hand this over to each of the speakers to make their opening remarks. And once the opening remarks are complete, I'll have 3 or 4 questions for the panelists based on the discussions we've had. And then we will take up questions from the audience. The goal really is to maximize the time for discussion and interaction. So I have the thankless job of telling the panelists when they are out of time. So what I'm going to do is when you're 3 minutes up, keeping with the Oscar traditions, I'll start clapping on my image so that you know that it's 3 minutes. And when it's 5 minutes, I'm just going to gently nudge you to, close, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. And timekeeping is my goal and priority today, as it is to listen to all of you and make this an interesting conversation. Having said that, keeping to my promise of 45 seconds, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Geeta. It'll be great to hear your opening remarks. And I have a question for you. It'll be great to sort of begin from there. I know from my experience of having worked with you that during this COVID time, you've been part of multiple collaborators, and some of them took off, some of them did not. But it'll be great to hear from you, what were some of the common themes that differentiated the ones that really succeeded, went all the way, against those that might have been a good idea, but actually didn't materialize or weren't as effective as they were meant to be.
So thanks, Ratish. So whenever I think of collaborations, I feel, they're best on paper and the most difficult on the field. There's always logic to do it, but when you start executing, that's when the challenges come up. So, I have this saying on my workstation, which I look up to every day. Like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And in my moments of frustration of dealing with collaborative, like that is the saying that, keeps me going. I mean, to your point, we are a foundation, it's a family foundation. Do we do a lot of collaboratives? I would say no. Less than 10-15% of our work is around collaboratives. And I feel collaboratives have a time and place in the journey of each program or of each organization. Yes, during COVID, we've done many more. I think crisis triggers more collaboratives. In fact, we started our COVID response with saying united we stand. So clearly, the barriers, as you said, needed to come down. I guess the question is which ones succeeded, which ones did not. The the point there is which ones were meant for the longer term, which ones were meant for a crisis mode. And I think within a crisis, collaboratives tend to succeed. There is an immediacy of action, there's a very clear goal. And the ones that are set up for a longer time, I think that's where challenges come forth. And I would not go into the details of it, but I would say the one that worked very well is the Samhita Collaborative, which is the Revive platform, where they got in a few CSR funders, NGOs, as well as the private sector to come together to assist informal sector workers. I think ACT was a very great collaborative, and Mohit will talk about it, so let me not go there. Things and the ones that have evolved over a period of time and continue to do well, I would say there are 4 C's of a collaborative that make it work. And I don't know if you know, there are 4 C's in a diamond quality also. And I mean, I'm not saying collaborators are like diamonds, but for whatever. And the 4 C's, I would say, I mean, the first one is clarity. Clarity of a grand vision and very specific tasks. I mean, both are important, and you need to keep reiterating. The second is commitment, of the leadership, of whoever is driving it. And yes, challenges will come, but you need to just move on. It's very easy to drop from a collaborative. It's the easiest thing to do. So I would just say the commitment is the third one. The third I would say is content and consistency. So the members need to see action coming out. It needs to be consistent. It's not that 1 month you do a major thing and then 6 months you're silent. So consistency and content. And the last C is communication. So I mean, in like different collaboratives have worked in different flavors of each of these 4 C's, but I would say to make it work in the long run, these are almost essential elements. And I would actually just pause here. I mean, I would love to go into some of the examples, but maybe we can take them one by one as we get into more discussions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Geeta. I think on the diamond point, if you were certainly hinting that successful collaborators are as rare as diamonds, then we'd love to discuss that more. But I think the point that you made, and I want to touch upon that as we go forward, is really collaborators for crisis mode and collaborators for long run. And I think we've all seen collaborators for crisis mode, and how much do they translate and evolve to a long-term focus? How much of them are probably good for the crisis mode in some sense is something that I'd love to discuss with the other panelists as well. But thank you so much for sharing. The next speaker that I want to invite is Ashutosh. Ashutosh, you've had the experience of working on collaboration across the philanthropy and the nonprofit sector, the government and industry, and if collaboration within one sector or one set of stakeholders is hard, this sort of making sure that everybody wins in a collaborative that involves all 3 stakeholders is often a challenge. So would love to hear from you in terms of, in your own experience, what are some of the, ingredients to ensure that all these 3 different stakeholders who might have very different intent actually come together and can succeed together?
Thanks, Ritesh. That's a very interesting question and a very important question. And actually, Geeta's really set the stage very well with her diamond analogy, right? And let me try to build upon that. But I have a, many times when we think about collaboration, or at least in this space, people think about a collaboration between two different set of stakeholders, right? And especially here, for example, we say collaboration with the government. Right. And I actually tend to differ from that. It's not just collaboration with the government, right? We've all heard of the triple bottom line, which is people, planet, and profits. I actually look at this collaboration now as a triple stakeholder perspective, right? Which is why I differ with just, the private sector and the government, or the private sector and this thing. And I look at it as people, which is what I would call the civil society represents the people or the citizens or whatever, the private sector and the public sector, which is the government. I look at this as a true PPP, which is people, the private sector and the public sector getting together, building a partnership. Right. And let me put that into a little bit of perspective. And as you know, in the inauguration, they said that we are facing huge challenges today. And if you really look at it, the challenges that we are all facing fundamentally are climate, education, health, care, and poverty, right? And the ability and the problems actually rotate around the ability to have affordable solutions, access to solutions, and availability of solutions. And these are global in nature. Now, why am I setting this context? Because if you look at this context, none of these issues can be ignored, and they will impact society as we know it as a whole. And the last 2020 is proof in point. Something as supposedly innocuous as a virus, which nobody could see, has stopped the world, right? And destroyed livelihoods, destroyed organizations, destroyed life as we know it. And once that happens, it impacts the corporates, it impacts the civil society, it impacts the governments, which is why all of us need to come together. And hence, I'll use another acronym. I mean, Geeta talked about 4 C's. I'm talking about something called a BAG, right? Which is, when you look at collaboration, right? The fundamental perspective of collaboration is it'll only work if we recognize that we have a vision. We're working towards a vision. And that is going to be what is very important. That you're working towards a vision and not an intermediary goal. And as long as you know that, then comes the 3-lettered acronym. Each organization or each stakeholder actually brings their A game to it, which means that if I as a corporate know that I am good at a particular thing, that's what I bring to the table, right? With that vision in mind. If I am a civil society, that's what I bring. So when I look at it from that perspective, right, and I sort of parse out what could be the responsibilities, I look at the civil society being important, very important to bring their A game, which is their ability to educate, reach, do the outreach, implement. The government to bring in policies which will enable all this to happen. The government to be able to set the infrastructure for a long-term for a long-term vision in place, right? And the A part here is acknowledge the role that you can play. Each one of us needs to acknowledge the role. And to this point of short-term to long-term, I think so you also need to acknowledge your role, that your role ends at a point of time and somebody else takes it up. That's when collaboration succeeds. And if you have, and the G is obviously the goal. So that's where my BAG sets up. You start with a vision, you bring your A game, you acknowledge that you have gaps and you help others fill the gaps and you achieve that goal, right? But ultimately, we need to understand, and that's where the private sector comes in. We bring in what you would call a certain amount of innovation. We bring in certain funds, but we also bring in, or as a private sector, an understanding that you need to create commercially sustainable solutions. There is as much philanthropy that can happen in the world. There is as much funds that the government can put in. But if the private sector can also bring in a certain amount of rigor of commercially sustainable things, that's very cool. And I'll stop here. I can see the slap on my face.
Oh, no, not at all. But thank you so much, Ashutosh. I think this was very helpful. And I think the point that you made, which is for me an extremely important issue, and I want to come to that also again when we talk about the Q&As, and it's an interesting framing, right? When we talk about SDGs, we always say any amount of philanthropic capital is not going to help us achieve SDGs. We actually need business capitals to stop where philanthropic capital ends and potentially public capital to come in as well. And what are ways to make those pathways effective, is going to be very, very important, and again, it's a longer conversation. I definitely want to come back to that. But thank you so much. And Ved, I want to go next to you. RCRC is actually one of the most, successful coalitions and a practitioner-led collaborative that happened during COVID. It demonstrated agility, it demonstrated a way to drive action on the ground very quickly. Would love to know your experiences having run and been an integral part of RCRC in terms of what have been some of the learnings from that experience.
Thank you, Ratish. And eminent speakers before me have made many points, and bringing anybody later is always, you run the risk of repetition. So let me, in fact, enforce or reinforce that. One of the C's that 4 things I would talk about: trust, trust in each other, alignment in values, and complementary skills, and communication. 2 C's. One of the C's is repetition of what Geeta was saying. Communication is important. But what brought us together is another C called crisis, which also, Geeta referred to. Who do you call when you are in crisis? As a child, you'll call your mother, or if you are sick, as a 75-year-old father, you'll call your son or daughter, depending on who you have. So trust is the first prerequisite in collaborative efforts. If you don't trust each other, even in crisis, that means, you're not going to go forward with that. So when I called Naren or Apurva or Prasanna, the 6 people on 18th of March, by 23rd, we were together, and we had a call with a health agency, tell us how to guide livelihood organizations during COVID, because community was locked in. We had already had the Prime Minister announcing on 22nd and 23rd of March. What do we do? How do we respond? How does our community respond? So trust, basically, I've known people for 20 years or more. So in that sense, and then soon we were 20 organizations. And within less than a month, we had 1 crore rupee coming from Umidyar. I mean, this was just like you hit 6 sixes in the first over. So I think people felt that, these NGOs don't come together. How come they came together? So maybe this was the reward for responding together faster. And I think overall we became 65 organizations. And altogether our reach is 16 million people, 1.6 crore. And our cumulative annual budget is 1,300 crores. So these livelihood organizations most of the people had known each other, but there was no single platform for livelihood organizations. Money had existed. But for a group of people to come together, trust was one basic major prerequisite. And I think by the fact that most of us have worked together in various other forums, many of them have come from IRMA, whatever it is, there was a value set. We believed in community's resilience. So this alignment in values was the second glue that has kept us going. Even today, we are going to celebrate 1 year first birthday on 18th of March, 2021. We have survived, in fact, and I would tell you soon that we will, if you have time, we have flourished. Third is complementary skills. So I think we had a distributional equity principle that everything will not be done by Ved, everything will not be done by Naren. So, for example, research was done by Vijay Shankar of SPS and Binoy Acharya of Unnati. They led the field. So I think we recognized that who had what skills, who had what interest, and we let them run with the ball. So that was something which is what Ashutosh was saying about A game. They brought the A game of the best possible skills we could find in health. We are mostly livelihoods. But when we didn't know how to train people in safe distancing and all of that, Jan Swasth Sahayog, set up by 6 AIMS doctors, was our member of RCRC, and they trained 25 organizations within RCRC how to train community to take care of this. And the last one, communicate frequently. That means we had a working committee which has 10 members. Initially, we used to meet thrice a week. Thrice a week, you won't believe, like board meetings thrice a week. And later on, we came to once every week. Till last month, we were meeting every week on Tuesday from 1:30 to 3:30. We had to make decisions. So we got about whatever money we got, that is not important, but we had to give it fairly and without any resentment. So we had to meet, we had to set up the game properly, etc. And so in that sense, these are the four major this thing. But before I end, I want to say that civil society is in crisis at some ways. How do we look at it? As RCRC is a collaborative. External environment, how do you look at it? Internal, I have already talked about these four factors. We can look at external environment giving us a threat. FCRA amendment is a major one. That got us together. Foreign hand, that kind of a thing. So how do we survive? How do we respond? We wrote a letter to the Ministry of Home Affairs, Secretary Mr. Ajay Bhalla. We came together. And in fact, we were the first network to write a letter to Ministry of Home Affairs. I'm telling you that many people were afraid. If we go out and write our names in the plea that we are making, we will be targeted. Yet, RCRC was the first network, first coalition to write a letter to Ministry of Home Affairs. How do we otherwise look at opportunities? Geeta is here. Social Stock Exchange was announced, and many of our friends in the community, they said, what is this? You are bringing capital markets? We are bringing those kind of people here. We are not going to collaborate. But Geeta is to be given credit that she said, okay, let's sit inside the room. I mean, you better, as they say, I mean, in America, you want to piss from outside the tent or you want to sit inside and piss outside. I'm sorry to use that language, but we actually took her advice, and fortunately, they made me the member of the Social Stock Exchange Technical Group, and we have given many recommendations.
Yeah,
I
think the Social Stock Exchange is a very important point. I want to come to that, and also we are running out of time. But I want to touch upon the point that you made, which I think is a larger question, which is how do you see RCRC evolve beyond the crisis? And it's not like the pandemic is behind us, to be honest. But at the same time, a larger role for the collaborative is something I would love to talk to you about. But if people were surprised that nonprofits came together to solve a crisis, I think people were even more surprised, Mohit, when they saw VCs come together to solve a crisis. It's something that not many people, I don't know if in your lifetime you imagined all of you coming together to do something, but we'd love to hear from you. You're new to this sector. This is a space that's is relatively new for you. How did the experience of sort of working in this together impact you and the way you saw problems and so on? I would love to hear your experiences.
Sure. Thanks, Ratish, for having us here, and thank you, AVP. And like you said, we're fledgling and learning from all of you. Look, right about the time when Ved was having his set of meetings, a bunch of us got together in March of 2020, and COVID was on the shores, and we just felt we had to do something. And a very instantaneous, spontaneous reaction was, how do we basically put together a fund to quickly give wings to young entrepreneurs and startups and NGOs who have ideas as to how to tackle this massive challenge in front of us. And before we knew it, we realized there were other groups in the startup world, the founders in particular, who were similarly doing similar meetings, and we got together. And so literally in a matter of 48 hours, a massive amount, hundreds of founders and investors across all the VC firms, across all the startups in India got together. And in a matter of a few weeks, we had raised about 100 crores of capital. These were from individuals across all the different firms and the companies that sort of operate in our Indian ecosystem. And to your point, I've been doing this for 15 years, and these are the folks who compete incredibly hard with each other every day of the normal. But everybody checked their egos at the door. Everybody left their agendas at the door, and sort of really were here to try and sort of fight the crisis at hand. That was sort of phase one, getting the fund put together. But what made it even more exciting was now the challenge was to try and find in a very impactful way how to really give the grants from this fund. And again, this was all grant money. So we organized ourselves in 10 tracks, and we actually do what we do for an everyday on an everyday basis, where we had dedicated teams in each of these 10 tracks organized around things like, prevention of spread of the disease, around contact tracing solutions, PPE and N95 production, trying to get the RT-PCR capacities in our country enhanced, and so on and so forth. And so we had folks basically get out there and start meeting a lot of different entrepreneurs and startups who had ideas in these different spaces. And just like our normal business, we met a lot of people. We saw and found the entrepreneurs that we thought could scale and could create impact. And we started giving the grants. And just like Ved said, it all started with actually putting a lot of effort and time in. And so before we knew it, we were actually having a daily IC call. Literally every evening, there was a group of 7 folks who sat down, and we had folks zooming in and out from there with their different proposals, and decisions were being made on the fly. Our IC was composed of founders, investors, and then we managed to get independents like Irina and Nachiket and others who came in to sort of help us make the right decision. So we had a balanced set of folks. And then folks like Geeta and the Gates Foundation and many others sort of made sure we covered off on the blind spots, since a lot of us were new to this whole space as well. So the second phase was really organizing the ecosystem to try and bubble to the top the most impactful founders and entrepreneurs who had ideas to go crack the problem. And that was second phase. The third was, all right, we had now, I think at this point, we've given over 100 grants, but we had at that point, call it something like 50 or 60 grants that were given. But now how do you really make them impactful in the field? And that's when we had a massive outreach through the foundation partners, as well as the governments and state governments in particular, where we started spending a lot of effort and time to make sure that we worked with the war rooms that were in place with the different states, and sort of told them, hey, here's what we have in our kit bag with the different grants that we've given. What is the biggest 3 priorities for your state or your city, and what can we pull out of this toolkit to make it most effective for you? So that was the journey. I would just sort of summarize by saying, to your point, the crisis is not behind us, but we the one thing we enjoyed and we made sure we did was we evolved. If the initial focus was around trying to beat the PPE problem or the testing problem, it's now moved to the vaccination problem, for example. And this ability to keep evolving as to what's needed right now and being iterative in our approach is, I think, what's kept the dynamic collaboration together.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mohit. I think it's very, very clear, and kind of leads on to the first question that I had. But before I do that, one request for the AVP and team. It'd be great to have questions coming from the audience. If there's any way you could let us know what those questions are, I'll try my best to weave them in, through the conversation as we are asking that. And if is it either through privately here or through the chat box, I think it'll be great to have the questions coming in as we are having these conversations with the speakers. The first question that I had, Geeta, was related to what you said, but I'd love to hear from Mohit, Ved as well. In some sense, the crisis gave clarity. It's sort of like how when something is burning, you kind of are able to zone out, cut all the noise, and say, this is really what we need to do. Let's focus on this, and so on. But at the same time, in a regular day, collaborations are painful. To just get everybody to focus, align, get that clarity, and so on. And I wonder that as some of the habits that have happened during this crisis are going to stay with us, like Zoom, for example, are there learnings that we had during the crisis on collaboration that we can continue to keep to collaborate better after the crisis as well? Are collaboratives going to be easier going forward because of our experience during the crisis? And are there things that we can learn and continue even if the crisis passes us? I think that will be great to hear from some of you. And also, with the related question for you, as the collaboratives are formed, be it ACT or RCRC, do you see a role for these bodies after this crisis is done as well? So I don't know, Geeta, if I could begin with you to have your thoughts and then ask Ved and Mohit for their thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, Ratish, so what did we learn that we can take forward from a collaboratives approach? I would say just the focus. As you said, cutting the noise is extremely important. And And we've seen collaboratives, like I would say industry associations are a form of collaborative. Some are effective, some are not, but they stay on in the long run, right? So, and I mean, I would say MFIN or the Microfinance Industry Network started before the crisis, but really got its fillip in the crisis and then, has continued to work. I think the point I had is, yes, you need collaboratives, but do you really need structured collaboratives to solve all problems? There are many things that you have to do as an individual organization. You do your pilots on your own, you do your, scale up on your own. You don't need collaboratives for that. And when I say unstructured collaboratives, like, we had used it, and I think in the crisis also it came out very well together, but in our education work, the government, the non-profits and the for-profits came in together, borrowed edtech solutions from one to the other. The non-profits were running the call center. The government was obviously, managing the entire project. And these are, I think they came together because there was a need. They'll start working on their own, as long as the spirit of collaboration stays behind. So, like the government should not now feel that, okay, done, I've taken all my learnings from edtech and I don't need to go back to them. So I would say there is, I mean, when we talk about the interblendedness and, the sector needs collaboratives, I would say sometimes you need the spirit of collaboration. Sometimes you need unstructured ad hoc collaboratives. And then sometimes, yes, you need structured collaboratives. I mean, my expectation is that what ACT is doing, will become like a fund structure, like a grant fund structure, but that's the structure behind it. Or what RCRC will do again becomes like an industry association with some projects. So what can we take forward? I would say focus. So, so if you need structured collaboratives, just being very, very focused, having that vision, and maybe just having short-term goals first, dealing with it and going forward. I mean, that's right, where I would put it.
No, absolutely, Geeta, and thanks for bringing that nuance. There's a difference between keeping the spirit of collaboration rather than the structures of the collaborative. And I think the spirit of collaboration probably is something that we can take forward. The structures of the collaborative, formal, informal, how much do we need, etc. But I think the one point that you made that I fully agree with is the line of sight to success being very clear. So being specific about that, I think is very, very critical and important. I fully agree with that.
And sorry, the one other point I would make, Ratish, is, and again, we saw it pre-crisis and during crisis, collaboratives formed by stronger organizations, and I'm not passing value judgment, but organizations that have their own models sorted out, own leadership management sorted out, is able to actually devote time to a collaborative. Whereas if you're trying to create a collaborative of, struggling pilots, it doesn't work. We've tried it even during the
Got it. Super. Geeta, thank you so much. Mohit, ACT has been and it has been an incredible success. I think what you've been able to do is great. Do you see the role for ACT, beyond the crisis as well? Or do you see it as something that was a very good response to a crisis, but not something that you're going to sustain in the long run?
Ratish, we got born in this crisis. And like you said, crisis brings people together. We'll let you know in 5 or 10 years whether we've been able to sort of stay together in peacetime. And that's certainly the objective and the ambition. I think the single biggest learning all of us had from this was individually, people were finding ways to create the social change.
Right.
But when we actually came together, more than the money, it was the networks that really allowed us to accelerate a lot of the impact that we want to create. Somebody knew someone with a single degree of separation, if you will, and work got done. And so I think we're fairly convinced that if ACT was able to sort of bring together a organized response to the COVID thing, and it had to happen in an urgent manner in a matter of months, we sort of pace ourselves better on structural challenges that exist, for example, in the education sector in India, or in the climate change and environment space in India, specifically around water and air. And when we put this question back out to the group of folks who had come together at ACT, we found that people were anyways doing a lot individually in these different areas. And they had sort of benefited by actually evangelizing their own causes. And when they found that others were sort of willing to come and provide their shoulder of support to it, it actually ended up getting a much larger impact. So That's what we're going to try. We're going to try and stay focused on healthcare, which is carrying on from what we started with the COVID response. But we'll selectively pick up education and environment as the three pillars that we want to try and create dedicated teams to, dedicated funds for, with dedicated ICs, so that we can actually give grants out to entrepreneurs and founders in these different areas. We're going to have to Geeta's point, stop thinking in such an urgent manner and now think that we might want to do this a lot more thoughtfully. So for example, in education, Ashish Dhawan from the Central Square Foundation and Macon, part of Udhyam, both folks who've actually spent time in the investing world or on the founder side have actually come together. And so we're bringing in folks who actually have a massive missionary zeal in terms of a social impact way, combined with some of the more commercial acumen that we've sort of seen in the startup world. And we're going to try and put that to test. And we'll let you know in a few years whether that's going to work or not. But we do feel there's something to be said for the startup way of trying to solve problems in terms of the engineering first approach, in terms of the speed of iteration, and the sort of thought process of not trying to recreate an asset, but to try and drive better utilization to existing infrastructure.
Great point, Mohit. And I think, for me, that is also one of the more interesting things is to find different ways and, a set of tools to be able to solve the problems that we have, and we're able to combine them effectively, and I think that's going to be extremely useful. And I think one of the points that you made in your initial remarks and now is also the point about leveraging expertise when that is available, and so to be able to bring that depth and that speed together to create agility. So thank you so much. Ved, you've touched upon in your introductory remarks about the need for a network or a structure that can collectively drive the voice of the nonprofit space to the government and so on. Like RCRC today is evolving beyond the crisis. I'd love to hear from you as well. How do you see the collaborative evolve beyond the crisis, and what lessons are you taking from your experience so far?
Thank you. I think, can we be entrepreneurial? And when we have Hathi, you have elephant. Will it move like a dragon or not is the question for the collaborative, especially in peacetime.
Right.
On a day-to-day basis, as Mohit was saying, can you still have the energy and a startup kind of a mindset? So I'll give you two examples. Can we be more ambitious than we can individually be? Individual organizational leaders we have. And as Geeta was saying, yes, strong organizations are needed. So we have Pradhan, we have AKRSP, we have Srijan, we have FES, each on their own. They are great organizations, path-breaking in many, many different ways, right? But together, can we be entrepreneurial and can we say be far more ambitious? And again, we will be proven wrong or right. I hope I'm proven right. One ambitious thing we are trying is, can we be a bigger tent than we are? Can we also bring in health organizations? Can we also bring in education organizations? Why would Ashish Dhawan join us? He is his own supremo in education field. Why? And so, but if you look at in the context of the government, we are still puny. So for that reason, it's very important to look at a possibility of a bigger tent, bada tambu. So we can have health, 20 organizations. We are JSS, but can we have 19 more? Similarly, education. So It's not the structural thing I'm looking at. A CIA also have these kinds of, that's not the way I'm looking at it. I'm looking, can we put together a formulation of thoughts, okay, how to respond to the budget? Only respond to the jobs they are not looking at, as Amitav Vyas or whatever the Mahesh Vyas says. Or can we also look at, actually, they didn't put that much money in health as they are claiming. So can we be actually talking to the government on par, on the same table or not? We can't just be we can't be a single trick pony. So that is one thing we are thinking of. Can we pull it off? We don't know. Second thing, we are karma yogis, we don't know Gyan, we have left. We did MBA, whatever we did, but we don't know energy, we don't know research. So another ambitious thing we did was we took on research. And 3 rounds of research we have done, and our sample size date is from 11,000 to 17,000 in 80 districts. So when I talked to Niti Ayog, Rajiv Kumar, he said, send me the report. Or I talked to Amarjit Sinha of PMO, he said, send me the report. because we not only are credible as implementing organizations, but we do bring some data. Then they also believe this halo effect. They must be serious about whatever data they are collecting. But we are not researchers. So here the challenge is, can the Karma Yogis talk to Jnana Yogis? So this collaboration can be talked, and we are talking to, I'm working with Ankur Sareen of IIM Ahmedabad, Richa Govel of APU, and also, of course, we are talking to Madhavan because he understands parliamentarians. So can we also add knowledge from the field? So the issues that we are researching are those issues that we think community is suffering from. Whether it is COVID or PHCs are not accessible, or they have cash crunch and they're suffering. So we push for Narega like hell. We had a Voices of the Field to Policymakers webinar with Mr. N.N. Sinha, Secretary RD. So the research actually, because NGOs are known for just telling stories. You bring them some stories, some anecdotes, you guys think we should believe you. So we have to, like Acer survey, we have to reinforce. So what is the end game? End game is two. One is policy change. Can we have poor policy in? So can we, when we talk to the government, policy makers in parliament, the MPs and the ministers, pro-poor policy, whatever field, that is one end game we want, one impact we want. Second, we want large scale impact on the ground. If we are working in say 10,000 villages, can their lives be improved in all sorts, in three ways: livelihoods, health, and education. So this is the impact we are looking for. So in that sense, these are our challenges and these are our ambitions. I hope we are proven right.
Yeah, and the civil society needs a very, very big tent, Virji. So I definitely hope that you're successful in bringing all of us and the diverse stakeholders together so that we are able to do this effectively and together. Yeah, and this is brilliant. And Ashutosh, I want to ask you the next question. And as you are in MasterCard, and from an industry point of view, there is always going to be something that you watch out for when you find your philanthropic partners. Like there are probably many, many opportunities to collaborate. I wanted to check with you from an industry lens, from your standpoint, what are you looking for when you're identifying potential partners for collaboration? Apart from them being able to bring their A game, them being able to bring in complementary capabilities, are there specific nuances that you can share with us? Because I know that there is a strong intent in philanthropy today to participate and collaborate with business, but we don't actually see a lot of it as much. So hearing from your vantage point on what are you looking for a successful partnership or a partner, I think would be a great addition to the conversation.
Great question. Great, and as Geeta, Ved, and Mohit were talking about it, I was sort of going back in time and seeing all, so I guess how things were falling in place. And if I really look at it, when we look at partnering with organizations, right? I think we need to understand something, that when an industry decides to get into a space, right, it more often than not gets into that space by looking at two or three things. One, what's the value that it can bring into that area? Right. Because cutting checks is very easy. But many organizations now want to go beyond cutting checks. They want to be involved, right? Because the value of being involved and the satisfaction that you get from being involved is far higher than cutting a check.
Right.
And we need to understand that from a corporate perspective, right? Which is why that is when you do say that there are opportunities to partner, right? I mean, we need to understand what's the primary ethos of that multinational or that Indian company or that small company also with whom you're going to partner with. And the program that you're bringing, does it match what their ideals, what their objectives, what their directions are? Right. Because they may want to get involved, right? There are some who just cut checks and they forget about it, right? That's one. So I think that's the first part, to understand that this is not a check cutting exercise. This is a partnership exercise, and hence the partnership can only succeed when you have what you call the common agenda and the common vision,
right?
And and the second thing that as I would look at when I partner with anyone, is to see how flexible are they and I to change to adjust the vision and the implementation as we measure success. Because remember, as corporates, we have one very bad problem, which is we try to measure anything and everything.
Yeah.
Right. And you've got to understand that you cannot run away from this. Right. So, and hence the partnership. So we need to look at those partners. We look at partners to be able to see, are they flexible enough, and will they be able to report it in a way by which we understand that, and we can go back and say that, this is what we've achieved. And the third and most important thing, and that's actually slightly a larger question, right? Which is, at the end of the day, everybody looks at driving impact. And impact is seen from how you've moved the needle in a particular area, whether that's education, whether that's healthcare, whether that's livelihood creation, etc. The second thing that they always look at is, we don't want to become a graveyard of pilots. And Mohit was talking about education, right? And I've been involved in education for the last 30 years. And I know India is a graveyard of pilots as far as education is concerned. There are very few programs which have really achieved massive scale, right? And hence that's where I come to the third point, where is that when these partnerships are looked at, we look at saying, when we are starting something, is it going to remain within the confines of the place that we are playing with? Are we planning for scale, and is the partner capable of enabling that scale? They may not be able to do that scale. Can they enable that scale? Right? The scale that we are looking at. These are those three, somewhere, I always like to put three things into 3 points, bullet points, but these are those three things which we tend to look at, I would tend to look at when I look at partnerships.
Yeah. On a lighter note, Ashutosh, I always say 3 things, even if I don't know what's the third thing. So I think you have a friend in me here. But I think the 2 points that you made that I want to try and emphasize, because I thought it's extremely critical. One is, when you look at a partnership, the value that we see from the partner on the other side, I think, is an extremely important one, because if that value is seen as money, the conversation often becomes very transactional, as what is a barter that we can set up. But if the value can be larger, then there is actually a greater way to create value for everyone, which I think is extremely important. How do you enlarge the pie when 2 people come together, I think, is very critical. And the second one that you said, which I think is a challenge in the social sector often, right? We believe that we will do something and then scale it. So we kind of scale what works, but we don't design for scale and show that
Exactly.
it is working,
Exactly.
So in some sense, how do we kind of design for scale and then demonstrate success, rather than do something and then see how do we scale it? I think is an extremely important point. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I want to move to another lens of this entire collaborative approach, there is always a lot of friction in collaboration. And my own experience over the last 1 year, there is need for an organization to hold this together, sort of reduce that friction so that collaboration becomes easier on everybody. This could be a back-end player. This could be somebody who's leading the collaborative. We've had a chance to work with you, Mohit, on the ad grants front, and Ved, in your case, a set of organizations played this role rather than one organization. So maybe I'd start with, again, Mohit first, and then maybe go to Geeta, and then end with Ved. It'd be great to say, what are some of the expectations from an organization like that's holding the collaborative together? Because there are organizations, I'm sure, in our discussion today, who are thinking of themselves as anchors of collaborative, and if there are things that they could sort of take back in playing that role.
Ratish, one of the advantages of ACT was we had never done it before. So we were at it the first time, and there was very little sort of previous religion that we had to attack in order to do something. We were just figuring it out. And I think that's important in a broader sense because of just the fluidity of the ideas, where almost everything was accepted and everything was worth trying. And when someone put an idea up, instead of it sort of being shot down, it was, how do I build on it? And how can I add my idea to it? And I saw that happening all the time. I'll give you a great anecdote. I remember this evening once, we had Nachiket, who of course had spent time with the Gates Foundation and cares a lot about healthcare in India. And we had Abhiraj, who runs Urban Company or Urban Clap, for those of you who ever enjoyed home services from them. And, Nachiket was upset that day. And he was upset, and we were like, why? And so he goes about, I ordered this house cleaning service from Urban Clap, and this guy shows up with gloves and perfectly on time, and he goes about just doing a spanking good job of cleaning my bathrooms or whatever areas he had sort of set up for doing it, and with a big smile, hope you have a nice day, he leaves, and everything is sort of like clockwork and everything just worked. And he's like, do you know, like in our country, we're not able to even deliver babies with this level of precision, where we don't even have gloves sometimes, and we don't have that level of hygiene, if you will, and so on and so forth. And like, what are you guys doing on the private sector with all of these great capabilities? Why aren't you applying it to, in this case, healthcare in government and other parts of our country? And it was a very interesting debate, because here there were two sort of parts clashing here. Somebody was driving a new consumer service where experience mattered, and he was delivering it in a certain way with the quality of service, and he was expecting a commercial remuneration for it. And there was a whole business model that got built on it. But obviously, from an importance to the country standpoint, there were so many learnings from here that we could actually apply to something that may be much, much more impactful. And those are the kind of discussions that we were having at the IC every day, where the social aspect was sort of constantly intersecting with what we were doing in our everyday commercial lives. And we were trying to see what aspects from here we could take over and adapt into here. So to me, that fluidity of communication, that ability to sort of pick the best, because there's no right answer on both sides, but there's probably a combined answer that makes sense to go forward, is what I think we're looking for.
Excellent. Geeta, I don't know if there's anything you would like to add.
Yeah, Ratish, I mean, to your point on the backbone organization, or sometimes even the secretariat of the collaborative, I would say yes. I mean, to Mohit's point, the neutrality, but again, just again and again emphasizing the clarity and the communication. I think it is this organization which will, provide a lot of that going forward, especially if you have to look at a long-term arrangement. And the last thing I would say is data or transparency. I mean, often we can say that data is not available in the social sector. I mean, it could be different types of data. Some data is available. So just making sure that that is transparently relayed back to, the members of the collaborative, and sort of anchoring the discussions around that is helpful.
Got it. Thank you, Geeta. Ved, if you could briefly also share from your perspective, having multiple organizations playing this role, I mean, top 3 learnings from that, I think would be very, very helpful.
So 2 things we were conscious of in the beginning. Of course, nobody had come for Nirvana to RCRC, because each one was running. They had reached the 5th stage of Maslow's hierarchy, whatever. They didn't come here to, as Mohit was saying, it's not the place for freaking out what you've not done. So we were actually quite excited about co-creating, and we were doing it for the first time. And it had been cooking for 4 or 5 years from somebody who was retiring from Ford Foundation days, Ajit Kanitkar. So we've been saying that, we should, but this was our chance. So in a way, we were excited together, whether it's Apurva, Jagdish, or Naren, or me, or Prasanna, and creating or co-creating this new animal. It was not so much we were trying to create a collaborative. No, we were trying to create something new that had been on our minds. At one point in time, we had listed 80 organizations. So this is the time we had got together. So one of the challenges we dealt with, I think fairly well, is because we got about 7 crore rupees from Gates and from Argyam, from Omidyar, from PPI. In those times, money had to reach every nook and corner. Despite COVID, of course, I used to go to the bank every day. But how to set up a norm that people feel it is fair? So we said everybody will get 2.5 lakh rupees. I'm just giving you a number.
Sure.
Whether it's large organization or whether it's a small organization, everybody will get kind of initial sum of money. So nobody will accuse the larger organizations who are sitting at the table of decision making that you have been sort of biased. So that was very important. In a large, we had already become 60 by then. So how to really be set up fair rules. I'll give you another one. Argyam came and said that after, okay, you've done relief, now we want to start a participatory groundwater management project. But we have only enough money for one organization in Rajasthan, one organization in Gujarat, one organization in Madhya Pradesh. Now there are several organizations in our collaborative in each of these. How do you select one over the other? So we again set up a process of application, criteria, interviews, and we were, without any resentment, we were able to still get one. And that is doing well. In fact, we do monthly meetings and they have made a presentation to general body, etc. So that's one important thing. As somebody was saying, unless you design for scale, and then you were yourself saying, so if tomorrow, so I'll give you a scale of this. With the ICAR and the NRLM, National Rural Livelihood Mission, we have signed an MOU to work in about 100 districts. And we have said whoever is working with the ICAR in those districts, that's the initial condition, and who can put in money and human resources, because the government is not giving any money. So we have designed a system of self-selection as well as presenting that selection to the government of India and asking them to accept it also. Right. So how do you set up processes by which everybody gets a fair chance of participating in a small or a large project is very, very important dimension of, what you are talking friction, but how do you facilitate? And another part of it is we are now doing general body meeting every month. So everything is out there for people. They can hold me accountable, etc. By not attending, they are saying you're not doing a good job. So we work very hard. So to enhance that, 60% people should be participating, etc. So this just to give you that one picture of how to run a collaborative.
Absolutely. I think I'm getting messages that we have 2 minutes to end. So I'm going to kind of honestly stop asking some interesting questions that I had in mind. But thank you so much for your time and for your insights. And I think it was just refreshing to hear different perspectives from people who have approached the same problem from diverse lenses and experiences and so on. I think a couple of things I want to close. I want to summarize before we close. I think what came up again and again is clarity. Crisis created clarity, but even in the long run, ensuring that there is clarity on success, but at the same time, the flexibility to sort of evolve it as we go along, I think is going to be very, very critical. Diversity of capability and the neutrality to respect those different capabilities is extremely important. I mean, everyone in the room who's on the table should realize that the other person is bringing a value that I will not be able to bring, because going back to what Sharstu said about the BAG, this is where I end. This is where the other person comes in. I think is very important. We talked about trust, and I think it came up in multiple ways: creating data and transparency, ensuring communication, because communication is like the bedrock of trust. To be able to do this, I think is very, very critical. And it's also interesting, like all of you touched upon, we're all going to sort of come back after 3 years and see, did ideas that we have actually materialize? Because we are in the beginning of seeing collaborative sort of scale beyond the crisis, and none of us have a sort of a sphere to say, well, this all work, but it'd be great to sort of watch this and learn from what we have learned from our experience and see how far we can go in the models that we are. A couple of things that I think will be questions for us to answer is just a regulatory environment. Today, the friction of just setting up a collaborative on contracts is harder than bringing people together. Hopefully, there are ways to simplify it, create structures that make it easier. But some of those things I'm sure are on their way. Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too, and I hope all the audience also did. So I'll stop here and hand it over to Rasika.
Thank you, Ratish.
Thank you, Ratish.
2 seconds, I would say we are working on a collaborative with Ratish and Sattva, and they're doing an amazing job. So, to your point on a backbone organization, I did want to highlight that. Yeah.
Thank you, Geeta.
Thank you, Ratish, for
Thank you very much.
I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Ratish, for the very succinct conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. We've now come to the end of the session on driving systems change through collaboratives. This session was made possible with the kind support of our festival partners, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Sesame Workshop India, the Rockefeller Foundation, COVID Action Collab, VNV Advisory Services, the British Asian Trust, WPP India CSR Foundation, Catalyse Management Services, and Sattva. To continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates in this session, please make full use of the messaging and meetings function of our festival platform. Do share your highlights of this session on social media, and remember to tag us using the hashtag #AVPN South Asia 2021 and #social impact. Up next, the session on building economic resilience for vulnerable populations is live on the platform. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the festival.